Everyone, I am just going to get my screen share set up. Hopefully you can see an agenda with 4 items on your screen. If someone can wave at me and go, yes, that's working, that would be fab. Brilliant. I can see Mike waving, so great. First of all, apologies if we get interrupted by 2 toddlers at all. I feel like I'm likely to have one of those embarrassing moments that you see on the BBC News when a quasi-naked toddler comes in. So hopefully we won't have that, but apologies if we do, or if there's any background noise. The joys of working from home amongst all of this. I know there's an hour and a half set aside. I hope you'll be relieved to know I do not intend to talk for an hour and a half. I'm hoping to keep to significantly less time than that. But the idea is I want to talk through 4 or 3 elements, and then, as Robin said, there'll be some time for questions at the end. I actually, because of how I'm sharing my screen, I can't see the comments box. So I'm going to leave Robin and Mike and people just to... if there's anything that you think I need to flag, just yell and feel free to interrupt. The 3 areas I want to talk through are, first of all, the principles of the integration between Donorfy and Xero. I then want to quickly show you through a setup. And then hopefully, if everything works fine, we will be able to show you a live demo and go through a few of the examples we get asked about a lot. I just have to put a caveat there that because Xero reset their demo companies every few weeks, and so we don't have a permanent example set up. So I'm hoping the example plays as it should today, but apologies if it doesn't. We struggled if we push everything through from Donorfy to Xero, we can't re-push it through, so we've not been able to do a full test of all the transactions before today. Just very quickly on my background, I'm a chartered accountant. We're an accounting firm principally, but we work only with charities, mainly with smaller charities under $1 million turnover. And so we got involved with Donorfy about two and a half years ago, I think now, Robin and Mike. And we've been working with them since, mainly looking at how to integrate Donorfy with Xero. The basic idea and the reason why is I'm sure all of you who are involved in charities know that wonderful moment where you're in a meeting, and I used to be a finance business partner for the fundraising teams at Christian Aid, and I'd go into a meeting and I'd bring my set of management accounts, and the lovely people in fundraising would be looking very enthusiastic and happy because as far as they were concerned, they'd raised £3 million in the last month. And I'd come in and I'd go, well, the finance figures tell me you've raised 1.2 million. And during the course of the meeting, we'd meet somewhere in the middle. The golden goose has always been to have fundraising and finance talking on the same figures. And the aim being is that hopefully with this integration, that can be a reality, is the ultimate aim. The way that the integration works is, let me just scroll down a bit, is that effectively there are 4 stages to the integration. The first thing is that you guys are going to enter your income in Donorfy. So whether that is via automated integrations with other software such as Just Giving, or whether that is with Go Cardless or Stripe, or whether it's through manual checks being entered, batch transactions, or whether it's via standing orders that you've then done via the batch functionality in Donorfy. Now, during this webinar, I'm not going to go into any of those integrations or into how those elements of Donorfy work, because if we go down that line, we're going to go down a rabbit hole and not deal with Xero. But effectively, the aim of this integration is that the first step that you are going to take is enter your income into Donorfy. What then happens is that there's a manual push into Xero. So we manually push that data into Xero. And by a manual push, I mean that you have to go into Donorfy and you select an option to send that information into Xero. It's not automated, so it doesn't just happen automatically in the background, and there's a whole load of reasons why we chose to do that in the integration, but it means that you can get your income sorted in Donorfy first, you can make sure you're happy with your income in Donorfy, and then you're going to manually push that into Xero. And I'm going to show you how to do that later, so we're going to come back to that in some detail later. What you're then going to do, and I'm not sure how many of you on here are Xero users already, but you're then going to do your bank reconciliation. And effectively the background is that what that manual push does is that manually pushes a whole load of received money transactions into Xero. So you'll complete your bank reconciliation in Xero. And then finally, you're going to be left with any transactions that haven't been entered into Donorfy. So that's going to be things like, it might be that you've had a direct amount paid by a trust, a grant that your fundraisers hadn't realised had come in. And once again, I'm going to come back to these three items later. So you'll be left with any missing items. And then effectively, for those of you who can remember your GCSE science classes, you've then got a feedback cycle and you go back to the top. So anything that we're left at the end in the process, those missing items from Donorfy will be entered into Donorfy. You'll then manually push those into Xero. You'll complete the bank reconciliation until you have nothing left. Now, what this means is that your coding in Donorfy is going to be the source of everything. And so Donorfy is going to be the master data source. And so this means, and the one thing that we found in the implementations we've done this, is that you suddenly find that you have to be really on the ball with coding things in Donorfy. So when we're coding things in Donorfy, we really need to make sure that everything is coded as we want it to be, that our products are correct. And if you're using funds, which most of you I suspect will be, or if you're using departments or anything and you want that information to flow into Xero, then you need to make sure that it's really accurate. But effectively, the process and the principle is this, that we're going to enter all our income into Donorfy. We're going to use a manual push within Donorfy to push that into Xero. And then we do our bank reconciliation in Xero. And anything left, we then need to enter into Donorfy and push back through. As I say, Donorfy, for all you fundraisers, Donorfy is now going to be the source and the real source of your finance data as well. And that therefore means that hopefully at the end of this process, Donorfy and Xero will match because they're going to have the same information. So that's the overall principle. Just very quickly, and apologies if you're not a Xero user, the reason why we've looked and why we were pushing Donorfy to do this integration and why we use Xero is because Xero has a lot more flexibility than Sage and QuickBooks, in our opinion. And so what we have there is what you're going to find when you're entering this income into Donorfy is that effectively you're going to have three main bits of information that you can carry into Xero. The first of those is going to be your product. And for almost all of you, for your finance geeks out there, that's going to link into your account code, which you have in any accounting system. An account code for the non-finance people is basically your product, i.e. it is regular giving, it's a general donation, it's a sale of a raffle ticket. What is it that's generated the income? But where Xero differs from other accounting software is that instead of forcing you to then have things like classes or departments, Xero then has what we call tracking categories, and there's two of these. And in Xero, your finance team will have set those up to link in with your organization. And effectively, when we get into the Donorfy integration, effectively what you've got is that those tracking categories that you've got 2 of could be linked into your funds. They could be linked in to your departments. You could link them into your campaigns. And there's a whole load of options. Sorry, this writing looks like a toddler's done it. Apologies. I'm sure my toddlers can actually do better writing. So the general principle, as I say, therefore, is that you have got these 4 elements and these 4 items that you're going to do enter the income, but then within that income information is going to carry through into Xero via the account code, and also via funds, departments and campaigns can all be carried through. Now, so far that's all very academic and very not seeing the software. So what we're going to do now is, that's the general principles. What I want to do is go through a live example. So I want to show you, first of all, how you set this up. I've seen Nicola's just said, can we map multiple Donorfy product codes into a single account code? Yes, you can. And I'm going to show you that in just a sec. And similarly with multiple Donorfy funds to single Xero tracking category. So I'm going to come on to those when we start looking at those now. I've managed to get the chat window on another window. So thank you, Nicola. So going into the software then. The first thing you will need to do is, if you want to set up this integration, it's not an integration that is automatically switched on. So you'll need to actually physically switch it on in the same way that you physically link to Just Giving or to MailChimp or wherever. But there's a few more steps in the process. So as with anything, any integration, the first place, as you've probably guessed, is to go to the settings menu in Donorfy. And you'll notice that this is a dummy account. This is my dummy account. So you won't be seeing any data that actually relates to anyone. There's not much data in here because we've tried to keep it as clean as possible. So if you go into settings, go into configurations. And then what you're going to do is you are going to search for Xero Settings, which is in amongst the integrations options. Now, as you'll see, we've removed the configuration, and we're going to set this up with a configuration. So the first thing it's going to do is to ask you to connect to your Xero account. So if you connect to Xero, now this is where we really hope it works as from my end, because we're going to link to the demo account. So just bear with me. Demo company UK account, and we're going to allow it access. Now, obviously, you guys probably only have one Donorfy account. We have a whole load. So obviously, we had to choose which organization we're linking to, but I'm going to link into the demo company so then we can hopefully get everything set up that we've set up earlier. So once you've linked, you're going to get a whole load of other options. And I am just going to suggest that you need to spend a bit of time with this. I am going to do the bare minimum today because we need to, generally this takes an hour or two, to be honest, to get everything fully set up on a live charity, just because of all the different options that we need to do. I'm just going to do the bare minimum to get us set up so you can then see how it works. So the first thing it's going to ask you to do is to do your default mappings. Now, what's happened at the point that that has brought everything through is that this has now given me a list, hopefully, of everything that's available in my Xero account. So this is now tailored to the Xero account I have linked it to. So when I look at my default bank accounts, I will see all the bank accounts I've got set up in Xero. So this will be tailored to your Xero account. Now, what we're just doing on this first screen is we're just setting up the default. So what is Donorfy going to do if there's nothing filled in? So we're going to start with, I'm just going to send this to my current account if there's nothing. It also asks you to decide what account. So I'm going to say if there's no account selected, I just want it to go to donations, other, which is an income account I've set up on this dummy account. And then in this dummy account, I've used my two tracking categories in Xero So this is my tracking categories. These are these two groups that we've got, these two additional labels I've got in Xero. So this is a Xero, not Donorfy thing. I am just going to say, what does it do? What do we put into Xero if these options are blank? So I'm just going to say this is based on a demo we did for a night shelter charity. So night shelters England, and then I'm going to say if there's no funds selected, I want it to go to unrestricted. There's a couple of other things here which I'm not going to go into any detail today, but if you sell things as a charity, so if you might, I don't know, you might sell pens, you might sell t-shirts, but you also might sell other things as well, might be membership packs or something, then there is the option, you'll use an inventory in Xero, there's the option to link that in. And also, I don't know how many of you are VAT registered, but it also links in with the tax settings on Xero as well. I'm going to leave those blank because we're going to do a basic setup. There's three more things we just need to do, which is processing costs. Where do I want my donation processing costs to go to? Well, I've got a fund set up for donation processing fees. And then finally, we can exclude payment methods. Now, once again, I could spend a lot of time on this one, so I'm just going to talk very quickly the idea of this. I'm just going to deal with Laura's just asked, what do you mean if there is nothing selected? So here, just on these I'll come back to that in a minute, in fact, Laura, when we do a live example, because I've deliberately put one in. I've deliberately left a couple in on the example I'm going to show you. Sorry, excluded payment methods. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but this is the idea of this. Obviously, in Donorfy, you've got your payment methods. So you might have a payment method for checks. You might have a payment method for standing orders. You might have a payment method for invoices. You might have a payment method for Stripe, go cardless, Just Given. How did the money come in? This, you can set up that certain types don't go into Xero. Now, practically speaking, the one that we do when we do a lot of integrations is if you raise invoices. So if you raise sales invoices, normally we suggest keeping the sales invoice functionality in Xero because it's an accounting system. It does stuff that a CRM system is not going to be able to do on that to the same extent. And so I always suggest use the software that does it best, and Xero sales invoicing system is really good. So we quite often then put those invoices as transactions in Donorfy so the fundraisers know that they're there, but actually we exclude them. So I could, for example, I've not set up invoices here, but I could, for example, say I want to exclude miscellaneous, or I want to exclude PayPal transactions. That's another one you might sometimes do. I don't know how many of you have PayPal. But PayPal also links directly in with Xero as well. So it might be you exclude PayPal. But what it means is that any transaction with that payment method selected will not flow through. The final thing you need to do is just select when you want the integration to start. So this is, you will not, therefore it won't try and send transactions with an accounting date prior to this date. So we've set that for this example as the 1st of October 2019. And once you're happy, you save changes. Next two tabs are a bit more time consuming, but I'm going to go through these. I'm going to go through the principles and then I'm going to map what I need to map. The first thing you need to do is map across your bank accounts. And the reason why this is important is if I just go into a transaction, is that when you enter a transaction into Donorfy, you obviously get asked what bank account has it gone into. Now, this is probably the most key thing to get right in this entire integration, because if you send this is going to tell Donorfy and Xero what bank account to attach it to in Xero. Now, once the transaction is in Xero, you cannot change the bank account. And so this is going to be, this is probably the one which we find causes a few issues every so often, because someone selected the wrong bank account, or in particular on recurring payment instructions, we find it's not been set up with a bank account, or it's been set up on the wrong bank account. And just to go back to Laura's question about what happens if nothing is selected, if, for example, I didn't select a bank account here, it will map to those defaults on that default mapping screen. So if there's no bank account selected, it'll go to the one that I've put in the default. So just going back into that Xero screen, what we need to do is tell the two systems how we want to map over. And this is where I can't remember who asked, sorry, I am rubbish with names. I think it was Nicola asked, can you start mapping multiple items? Well, on bank accounts, you probably don't want to, but when we get to Xero account mappings, you can. So I've just seen another message come up, sorry, apologies. Thank you, George. I think the recording will be going up at some point, so please do feel free to have a look. So on bank accounts, what we need to do is we just need to map across the bank accounts. So if you just hit this little plus, same Donorfy screen that you're used to on other settings, what we're then going to have is throughout this, we're going to have the Donorfy list of options on the left and the Xero options on the right. So on bank accounts, we are going to go, okay, in Donorfy, I've set up 2 bank accounts. I've set up my main account and my other account. Now, what you quite often find is that what fundraisers want to call a bank account and what finance wants to call a bank account are 2 different things. So the great thing about this integration is that you can use different names in the 2 different systems and it will still map across. With the accounts download functionality, that's not as flexible, but with this integration, you can have different names. So in this, for example, my main account in Donorfy is actually my RBS current account from a finance perspective. And so all I'm saying is that I'm telling Donorfy that anything that's going into the Donorfy main account maps over to the Xero RBS current account. So I'll save my changes. And then I also just want to do the other account as well. So my other account, and then that actually maps across to my Donor Direct account in my system. But this is where, as I say, you can have 2 different. That's actually, interestingly, that's the account that this charity was using for its standing orders. So from a fundraising perspective, it might be that that's called the regular giving account rather than the other account. But you can have 2 different names in the 2 different systems. So the second stage after having done my default mappings is I need to link the 2 bank accounts. The third stage is the most time-consuming stage, and this is where we are going to map everything across. And this literally is where you will you'll probably take quite a while to do this. And it's also where you'll probably want to sit down, if you're on fundraising, sit down with finance and fundraising actually need to sit down in a room and talk to one another. I'd probably suggest getting some Jaffa cakes or something sweet to keep everyone happy, because this might be a long meeting. But what you need to do is you need to start mapping across everything. And effectively, this is where we're going to get the detail. So on my Donorfy side, I have got lots of different options here. I'm going to see all my campaigns list here. So just a warning, this can get quite a long list, because if you have got, and we've got clients with hundreds of campaigns set up in their organization, if you've got lots of campaigns, you're going to see every single one here. You'll see all your products, you'll see all your funds, you'll see all your departments, you'll see all your payment methods, and you will see all your constituent types. And then on the Xero side, you will see your account codes. So I've got all my income account codes. This will only bring in the income account codes. It doesn't bring in all the expenditure ones. And then in Xero, I've set up 2 tracking categories, one of which is areas of work and one of which is funds. And then also you'll see inventory items, because this is a Donorfy Xero, demo company, and also you'll see the tax rates as well. And this is entirely flexible. So going back to, I think it was Nicola, Nicola's question about, can I map multiple Donorfy product codes into a single Xero account code? You can. So for example, you might have in Donorfy, you might have multiple products for regular giving. So you might have regular giving from individuals, you might have regular giving from companies, you might have you might slice it other ways. You might have different types of regular giving based on what people give to and what they've signed up to give to. But in Xero, you might just have one regular giving code. Or one that I've seen quite often is that donations is sliced to a far higher level of detail in Donorfy than it is in Xero. So you can map multiple. And let's just, given that as an example, I'm just going to say, the way that you would do that is say that you wanted both general donations and regular giving to go to one account code in Xero. You'd have to select general donations. Now I'm just going to choose donations other. And I'll save that, and then I will add one other, which is to, so I also wanted regular giving to map across to donations other as well. And I'd then save, and then you can have multiple items go into the same account code. Now, the one thing I'm going to say at this stage is that this can become quite an unwieldy list, if I'm totally honest. So it's worth really taking your time to get this set up correctly, because once you've pushed the data through into Xero, you will have to manually adjust items in both systems. Once it's been pushed, it's not a continuous live link, so you won't be able to readjust in one system and it follow through. Now I'm just going to very quickly select what we need for the demo to work. So my regular giving is actually going to go to regular giving. And also I've put in some challenge event income into this system from Just Giving. So challenge events is going into my challenge events in Xero. I've got to, so I'm mapping my product, in this case, into my account codes. I'm also actually going to map those funds. So in Donorfy, I've obviously got my funds. I've got my general fund is my unrestricted fund. Now, obviously, these are, as in any list in Donorfy, you can start typing and it'll speed things up. So I'm just going to do that to save a bit of time. So I'm just going to map across my funds. Otherwise, this is not going to work in the demo. So just bear with me while I do this. But the idea being is that we are literally mapping across anything that we want label data to do it. It's not, Laura's just asked, is it compulsory to map anything beyond products? I don't know how many people follow in the chat, but I'll try and cover some as we go as well. But you don't have to do everything. The only thing to be aware of is obviously if it's not mapped, it's going to go back to those default mappings. So I would say where I have seen this work the best is when the time's taken to literally ensure that all my products are mapped across to some type of category, and if I'm tracking restrictions in Xero, then that is done as well. The more data you carry over, the more useful it's going to be, and the one thing I would say, it's going back to this idea of fundraising and finance talking two different languages. If you map over the maximum amount of staff, then you're going to have the least issues with people turning around and saying, oh, I've got different figures to you. So I would suggest taking the time just to do this. Sorry, I've literally got 2 more to do. Whilst I'm doing this, the only thing I do want to just, from our experience implementing this, is campaigns. It depends how you use campaigns in your organization, but if you are what I would call a campaign addict, and you're a campaign addict in my eyes, if you are using these for a lot of different things and have got hundreds of campaigns set up, you're probably not going to want campaign to be a driving factor in your Xero integration. If you have got hundreds of campaigns, probably you're going to use the products and the funds and the departments as your key drivers on this integration, because otherwise every time you set up a new campaign, you're going to start having issues with the integration, potentially needing additional settings set up. So I've generally found that actually, whilst we've got the option of campaigns here, and in a couple of charities we've implemented this in, we have used it, it's been those organizations where they're not what I call a campaign addict. If you love your campaigns and you have a separate campaign, for example, for every single time someone does a sponsored event for you, or if you use it for a very high level of detail, so a lot of subdividing, then I would suggest that campaigns is not going to be a driver in this integration, just because you will be here till next Christmas setting it up. So once you've mapped over all your fields, obviously there's a whole load of other fields that I could have mapped across, but we'll be here till next Christmas and you'll get bored. I'm going to leave it there. You can come back to this at any point and you can change it. So please do feel free to come back and change it. That's your setup done. So you are now good to go. You've got the mapping done. This final tab, by the way, just tells you that you're connected, and should you wish to disconnect from Xero and switch off this integration for whatever reason, that's the button to do. Now, I'm not going to press that button because otherwise I'm going to be in a bit of pickle, but you can disconnect at a later date. So just going back to our agenda, sorry, I've just totally hit the wrong button, and that's gone through. We've done the principles, we've done the setup. What I now just want to do is a very quick live demo of how this then works. So I've already entered a whole load of financial transactions into, I say a whole load, I've entered about 12 transactions into my Donorfy account earlier today. And hopefully they're going to reconcile with my bank account if this works fine. But what I want to do is try and show you a few examples of how things look. Now, it's not going to look identical in every single Xero account, because there's a whole load of factors which I'll talk through very quickly in a minute that will impact how your bank account looks. But hopefully it'll give you a good flavour of how this works. So you've entered all your, going back to that diagram, you've entered all your income into Donorfy. You've set up your Xero to Donorfy, Donorfy to Xero link. We now need to do this step 2, which is manually pushing to Xero. Whenever anyone sees Faye, I've seen your question and I'm going to come back to it in a minute if that's okay. I'm just going to park that question. Because it'll become apparent when you see the next slide. Everyone gets a bit worried when you see the manual push because they think it's a really big step. It's really not. Literally, all you have to do once you've got your income in Donorfy is go to Financial and then go to Xero, which will hopefully have appeared in your Donorfys. I think it was about December, January. You guys would have seen it live. We had access to the beta. So we saw a bit more. Now, there's a few options here. Now, interestingly, that's not got everything I want. So I'm just going to just very quickly do one other thing, which is I just want to double check that this has not, no, that should be showing. I'm just going to confirm that undo. Okay, what transactions do you want to send to Xero? There's a few options here. The first is you just send all unsent transactions. There's anything that's not been sent, and you'll be able to see them here below. Or if you want to look at a specific date range, you can also just deselect that yes and go from date to date. Now I'm just going to send everything for the moment. Now I'm a little intrigued as to why there's a few other things not showing. So I'm going to have a look in just a sec as to what happened there. But if you then just queue the transactions for sending, what we'll then do is in the background, it will do some work. But we're just going to, what it will do is it will send you an email. Whichever user's logged in will get an email saying that that has been done. Now, I am just going to see, has that gone through yet? Let me go into my Xero account and see whether that has now come through. Some of them have. We're still just waiting for the others. Just bear with me. This is always the thing when you do demos, is they're waiting for the systems to catch up with one another. Okay, I'm hoping that that means this has worked as yes, brilliant, great. Okay, so those I will have had, I haven't got my emails open, but those have now sent through into my Xero account. So I'm not going to spend ages talking through how reconciliations work on Donorfy, but what you should find is that hopefully what you will start to find is that things flow through. And what's going to happen is that these transactions from Donorfy are going to appear on the right-hand side of your reconciliation screen. So effectively, if you have bank feeds set up, so Faye, you asked a question about the live link between Xero and your bank account, that still works as normal. So I have still got, this is actually, I've done a manual import here because this is a test, but if that was a live bank feed, that live bank feed would still update in Xero as it normally would. And on the right-hand side, it's going to start showing my transactions coming through. Now, what we have got here is you're going to start seeing these options come through, as I say. So here I've got on the 9th of March, this is a standing order, a monthly standing order of £25. It's been set up as a recurring payment instruction in Donorfy. And then I've marked those as received using the EFT and batch transactions functionality. What it will do is that it comes through, so then you've seen this. I'm just going to open that transaction so then you can see how that comes through. In Xero, that comes through as a receive money. It's come through into my Dona direct account, and they all come through with the contact as Donorfy web app. Doesn't actually carry through. Pam, I'll come back to your question in a minute about multiple Donorfy payments being paid into one group's amount. But they'll come through as a from Donorfy web app. Whilst I'm doing this, Mike, are you able to go into my Donorfy test account and just see why? I think it's because I did an accounts download that's managed to block some transactions coming through. There's some other transactions that should have come through, but I think it's because I did an accounts download. Can you see whether you can reset some of those? If you look, just so that you know, that under the donor tests, and you'll see a whole load of transactions, and they're not showing, and I think it's because I did an accounts download earlier. Mike. I'm hoping Mike someone can solve that for me at Donorfy's end. But what you will find is that they come through as Donorfy web app. The date will be the account transaction date, the amount. The reference will be the account transaction reference unless this has been overridden. And then it'll give you some more details. So it gives you the description of regular given and who this is attached to. Now it's given me my account, which is regular given. Sarah, I'll cover that question as well in a minute about cash bank together. Night shelters is my areas of work and unrestricted. And what this does, it does create a link, a static link to the transaction in Donorfy. So here, if I hit this go to Donorfy, it'll actually take me to the it'll take me to the beneficiary, to the contact, to the constituent in Donorfy. Now, the reason it only takes me to the constituent is because there is the actual transaction in and of itself is on the timeline and doesn't have its own web page, so to speak. So it links to a web page, which is the constituent. So if I look here, I'll then be able to go into the transaction. Now, what you'll also see is that this has now gone through and it's marked as sent through into Xero. And here I can also go back in Donorfy and I can select view the transaction in Xero and it will take me to the transaction in Xero. Robin, I've tried undoing and they're still not coming through for some reason, but I'll try again in a minute. So I can link from Donorfy. I can follow through from Donorfy into Xero. So what then happens is that once I'm happy, I can then just reconcile as normal. So I will have the Nash AP, that I know is that, and I can go into the detail and track. Now what you'll see is that actually this is, okay, Jane, I'll come back to that in just a sec. Let me just do, I'll do that now. So Jane's just asked about the second tracking category. How did I map that across? It's all done via that configuration. And if you go into Xero Settings, and it's all done via that account mapping. So this one here, where I've done the department to areas of work. So I've mapped across a department, Night Shelters England, to my areas of work, Night Shelters England, by just using those drop-down boxes in here. Okay, so I've done that all based on the department here and then mapping it to the tracking category, which I've set up as an area of work here. Does that make sense, Jane?
Sorry, Andy, I'm still not understanding how you have it to yours in Xero. I'm a Xero user, not a Donorfy user.
Okay, so
the second part is it went to unrestricted. And
okay, the second. So that was done. I've used, so I'm just going to very quickly, people, do a quick, go into the Xero Settings. So in my tracking, I have set up two set tracking categories. I've set up a tracking category for areas of work and a tracking category for funds. And then in Donorfy, so here I've allocated my fund in Donorfy to my fund in Xero. So once again, using those drop downs, my fund general, which is what I'm using as unrestricted in Donorfy, and then fund unrestricted here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get that now. Sorry. Yeah.
No worries at all. No worries at all. So, yes. So, what you'll then be left with on your bank rec is anything that's not come through. So if I go back to I'm going to come back to the bulk items in a minute. No worries, Andrew. Hope you have a good rest of the day. So on my Donorfy direct account, what I'm left with on my bank reconciliation is this item here, which is the £25. the £25, which I've reconciled. I've then got two here, which are two £5 standing orders. Now, these haven't flown through from Dona, or it looks like they haven't flowed through from Donorfy to Xero. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look in my Donorfy to see whether they happened. Now, this is where you're going to have to trust me for a minute, because I've set up, in setting this up, I didn't think this through, and I've got loads of test donors. So I've got test donor 1, 10, 11, 2, 3, 5. Now, what I am hoping is, nope, that's not the right one. I think it's the next one down. No, okay. So I'm just going to go backwards to get to the transaction, because I want to not spend too long here. Donor 2, I thought I had. So, when you've got, what you're then going to do is deal with anything that's left over. Now, maybe it's not been entered into Donorfy yet, in which case you're then going to go through and you're going to go to your fundraisers and say, we've received £10,000 on the bank statement from Joe Blogs Trust. What is this? Can you enter it into Donorfy? Can you add the details to Donorfy? And hopefully your fundraisers will oblige. Or if you're smaller charity and fundraising and finance the same person, great, you won't be having this problem anyway, because hopefully you agree with yourself on the figures. Although I've had moments where I've disagreed with myself on the figures, but you'll then add those. But what you may find, especially in the early setup phase, is that actually there's something's gone wrong. And that's not that something's gone wrong with the integration, it's that the data's wrong in Donorfy. So this is a key example. This is a recurring payment instruction from the donor, Mr. Test Donor. And if I look at that contact on Donorfy, then you'll see I've got that recurring payment instruction, and actually I've got a transaction on the 1st of March for £5 as a standing order. So what I'm then going to do is just have a look at the detail. Now, there's various things to check. The first thing I would do is check to see whether it already says view the transaction in Xero. If so, then I would select that button, because that's going to show you the transaction in Xero, because it's saying this is in Xero, I've passed it through to Xero. And the first thing to check is what bank account has it gone to. And in Xero users will know you can do that at the top of your screen. I've just highlighted it there. Let's just try and make that a bit bigger. So this has gone to my current account, and it's because whoever set up this recurring payment instruction in Xero didn't add the put it to the main account rather than to the other account. So the issue I've got now is that that's gone to the wrong bank account. There's no quick and easy way to solve this. Effectively, there's two ways of doing it. The way that I have done it on some is that we've just manually deleted the transaction in Xero, and then we've manually entered it into Xero. The other option is to delete the transaction in both systems and then rerun the standing order once you've corrected the bank account. So if you correct that to the other account, there's not a quick and easy fix on that. What you cannot do is that this system's not a live link, so you can't in the individual transaction just change the bank account in the transaction. It won't do anything to Xero. It doesn't talk live to Xero. It's a manual push. So just bear that in mind, that it's worth just double checking. But you'll need to go through any remaining items and see what's happened. Now, what I'm just going to do is see whether that's now going to pull through the other items. No. Bear with me, because I just want to see what's happened on this as to why it's not. So that's been undone, Robin. Save and update. I think I did that. I've done that and it didn't work, Robin. Bear with me, this is because of something I've done, not something on the integration. So what will happen is, say for example, you have got a batch of checks or a batch of just giving payments or something. Then in Xero, what you have is an option to match multiple items. So say, for example, now I was hoping to show you a live example, but unfortunately with the demo company, it's not quite worked, which is nothing to do with the integration. It's down to me, sorry. What you might have is, for example, 3 checks having gone into the system. So if I just go into my constituents actually, and I did have these as 3 items. So let me just have a look. So on this same individual, I have got a check paid, a check here. Now, what we've got is the, this was one of several checks paid in under a check paying in reference of 06655. Now, what you will find is that quite often you'll have either Just Giving do this, they pay in a batch, or you'll pay in a batch of checks. You'll do the Donorfy side as normal. You will you'll add the transactions, you'll add them individually to the relevant people, and then you'll send the transactions through. Now, a specific thing on this I'm just going to say to help you with this, and as I say, I was hoping to show you a live example, but it's not quite worked. The one thing you want to do, especially with checks, is if you are paying in a batch, is make sure that you put some type of reference in the payment reference field. Okay, so in this payment reference, it is worth just spending the time that if you've got 5 checks, for example, we will put all of those in with that. That's the paying in slip reference, because on my bank accounts, on this, it will, that's what shows on my bank statement. So I've got that paying in reference showing on my bank statement. So actually in Xero, in Donorfy, what I've done is against all of those transactions within the payment options, so within that payment more, I'm adding that reference of 006655, which I'm doing as I'm filling in the paying in slip. So as I'm filling in that paying in slip to pay them in, I'm paying them in. If you don't have a paying in slip reference, use the date you're paying it in. Use something that means you can identify all of those items, because that reference will then flow through into Xero. And so when you get your bank reconciliation screen, now obviously this isn't going to work as a live example. What I can then do is I can search by the name or reference. And if I have entered that reference into the transactions here, it will flow through into Xero. So I can do 006655. Now, nothing's going to show because I've not sent those transactions through yet. But in Xero, in Donorfy, sorry, if I did a list of all of those payments, so I'm just going to do a transaction payment list. I'm just going to do reference, just so you can see. And if I just select all of those where the reference equals 06655, then you'll see that if you add up those amounts that would have flowed through into Xero, you can also do this via the batch feature, obviously. So you can do the batch, but you just then need to you need to attach some type of reference. It depends how you work, Sarah, individually. We generally find different charities have different processes for paying in checks, but a lot of ours have someone who's got a do that, so they then automatically update Donorfy. So when they print from the batch to create the bank checklist, and they quickly go in and update those transactions, so then it just assists with the reconciliation. The reason why it would be good is that once you update that, it just means that the reconciliation in Xero is going to be a lot easier. So it just means you'll be able to search by that reference and do it. So you can enter a paying you can enter references, the payment reference in the batch feature, or you can do it later when you've got the bank, when you create the bank checklist in as well. Okay, and the same applies for Just Giving. Just Giving, the only thing to flag with Just Giving, which I just want to flag quickly, is that there is something that impacts this integration from a Just Giving end. Now, I can't show you a live example of this because I'd have to go into a client's data, and obviously this is a recorded session that's going to be open to the general public. So for GDPR reasons, I'm not going to get that up on the screen. But what you will see if you go into Just Giving transaction on your Donorfy account is that once Just Giving has claimed the gift aid, Just Giving obviously take a transaction processing fee off the gift aid as well. And the way that Donorfy and Just Giving work currently is that the Just Giving transaction processing fee is amended at that point. So if you are using Just Giving, I'm going to say you need to keep on top of sending your data through to Xero. Because if you don't, what will happen is that when Just Giving claims the gift aid, your underlying transaction will change. Because what happens with the processing fee is that processing fee goes through into Donorfy as well, into Xero, sorry, as well. And so if that transaction processing fee has changed, then you will have problems with the reconciliation. However, we found that if you send the transactions once a week, you're absolutely fine, because on average, it takes Just Giving about a month to claim the gift aid. The only other quick checker that I just want to put out there is just going back to standing orders. And I'm just going to get up that transaction that we looked at on the £25. I'm just going to unreconcile this for a moment because it'll, oh no, that one's slippy. It's already reconciled. So let me just unreconcile it to show this in action. What you'll have noticed is that when you're on the bank reconciliation screen, and this is a setup thing that I'm just going to flag, that when you're on that bank reconciliation screen, the reference that's currently brought through on that standing order is the transaction reference, which frankly is a bit unuseful. When you're reconciling, we've got a few clients who have hundreds of standing orders going into their bank account a month. And so on one date, you might have £125 if you're a lucky charity. And therefore, which £25 am I matching to? Well, you can obviously go into the detail of the transaction, open my transaction up, and then check that it's the right one. Okay, regular Mr. Dona test 1. Well, that's not quite right, but I know it is because of how I've set it up. But the easiest thing is actually when you set up that item in Donorfy, then I am going to suggest that before you switch on the link, you just do a quick check of all your recurring payment instructions. So if I go into Donorfy 1 test, and this is the person with the recurring payment transaction of £25. From when I've done EFTs and things in Donorfy, I've put the reference here as Nash AP, which appears on the bank statement. Now, what that means is that actually at the moment, if I was doing the batch transactions and marking them as paid or received, then it allows me just to check against the bank statement a bit more easily. But this reference field here doesn't flow through in the recurring payment instruction. What we need to do is make sure that the reference on the payment does. So it's worth just, if you're using this process and you have a lot of standing orders, just do a report on all your recurring payment instructions in Donorfy, go into this more option, and just make sure that that reference is in the payment reference as well. What that means is that these transactions at the moment, because it didn't have this, the payment reference is blank, but moving forward, that will now have Nash AP in it, which will allow me to reconcile between the two systems a lot quicker, as that will now appear as the option on my reconciliation screen. There's lots more I could show you, and we normally do quite a detailed training when we're doing integration, because all of you are going to have slightly different payment things, you're going to have different payment methods, you're going to have different bank accounts, and your Xero is likely to be set up, whereas most people obviously use funds for funds in Donorfy and products as products in Donorfy. Xero is a very flexible system, so it's likely that you've got a lot of customization in your Xero database. Apologies, my child is banging on the window. Apologies. It is one of those BBC moments. Now, what? Sorry, I've entirely lost my train of thought as a result. But we spend a lot of time in integrations doing the training. It's worth just spending time getting that first setup right, getting that account mapping right within settings. The only other thing I just need to flag for you guys to be aware of at the moment is that if you use the gift aid functionality in gift aid claims in Donorfy, because that doesn't create a transaction in and of itself at the moment in Donorfy, that won't flow through into Xero. And the way around that is that we've set up in all our clients a constituent, which is Hmrc gift aid. And every time that gift aid gets claimed, we just add a transaction into Donorfy with the amount that's just been claimed and come through and the date it came through. So then there's a matching transaction to push through. The same issue happens with gift aid on Just Giving, which doesn't flow through from. When that flows through from Just Giving to Donorfy, it doesn't create a new transaction. It just flags the other transaction as gift aid claimed. Now, both of those, if you look on the roadmap on the Donorfy website, are things that are in the wish list for things moving forward. But it's still entirely workable, and it's really saved time on our clients. And with the clients we've used it on, everyone has really found it beneficial, and it has helped to try and keep fundraising and finance on the same wavelength. Okay, Pam has just asked, we're going to go into questions now.